Well, hello and welcome to the SOLIDWORKS electrical webinar. I am Cheri Guntzviller from GoEngineer, and I will be presenting for you today on exploring the PLCs. When doing so here, we will go ahead and look at exploring the basics of this PLC Manager while generating some schematics, some symbols through automatic operation and associations. There's a number of ways to be able to do this. And then we will also be looking at the PLC templates to discuss further how these are then applied. So first we have to determine what we are going to want to do. Where do we want to start? Do we want to start here with the PLC modules, whether it's racks, whether it's modules, whether it's cards? So remote I/O, flex I/O, or are we looking at the inputs and outputs? Now, when I'm talking about inputs and outputs, what I'm truly referring to is the fact that inputs and outputs are something that can be completely separated from the PLCs. And we'll take a look a little bit further about that here in just a few minutes. The webinar that we are doing today is going to be this first section about the layouts with the PLC modules and the racks and the cards. We have a second webinar for the inputs and outputs. Truly, you need both of these to be able to take advantage of all the features and functions that the software provides. Let's take a look then at possibly the layout of the PLCs. So when we are looking at those PLC layouts, one of the next steps we will be then doing is adding manufacturer's parts to that layout. From here, we will go ahead and then draw the schematics. There's a number of ways to draw these schematics. These are my terms called full auto, semi-auto, and manual. In the software, they're called Generate Drawing, Insert PLC, or the simple association, which you are probably used to with your current drawing schemes. So let's look at the layout of the PLCs. So when I'm talking about the layout of the PLC, what I need to think about is how many PLCs are we going to use? Do I have just one main PLC? Do I have things like connected cards or modules, meaning flex I/O? Is there a rack? Am I using cards? Is there a power supply that should go on those cards? Is there remote I/O? These are the types of things that you are looking at when you are looking for the PLC layout. The Electrical Project PLC Manager is located under the Electrical Project. You will find it here under the PLCs. Going to the PLCs, you will then be able to start by selecting what it is that you are wanting to do. Are you wanting to start with a mark or with a manufacturer? We are going to start with a mark because truly the manufacturer is something that you can add later. I am more concerned with adding a layout. So I'm going to change the root here to be PLC, and then I'm going to give it a description. These things here that I am truly wanting to do and lay out this way are only going to help in the long run. Again, I'm not adding a manufacturer. If you play around with adding your racks, your modules at this point in time, and lay out how you are wanting things, you can then create those positions. So here I'm going to go ahead and add a rack. This rack, yes, I've got some Allen Bradleys. This one that I'm selecting is a 7 slot. By doing so, that rack is now creating those positions for being able to add a card. What's nice is that when you bring in the rack, it's going to tell you how many slots it has and give you those positions to work with. I am not concerned at the moment what is going to be in these cards. I just want to be able to give these cards that position to be able to work with. I'm going to go ahead and create a second PLC. It's the second PLC I'm going to use, and create some flex I/O or some remote I/O access. So we'll create a secondary PLC here. Now that I've got this secondary PLC, by highlighting the PLC, I am then adding things like modules. When you classify your devices, you're going to be classifying them with either modules with interface or modules without interface. By adding a module that has a classification of module, you will then get some additional information like down below in this card position, a number 1, where when it's not, and you can see that card position here on this manager, each time you are then adding a module, it is then going to increment for you. If you try to add like a PLC base part, that incrementing of those positions will not happen. So here all I'm doing is changing the root so that way I can tell whether I've got modules, whether I've got PLCs, whether I have a rack, and truly I am never going to change these positions. I may change the module that is assigned to this position, but I am not going to change this position at all. So that is strictly how you lay out a PLC. Very straightforward. Now, some people ask, well, why did you do it this way? I normally just do symbols on a page, and then I start placing those symbols, those manufacturers for that specific symbol. There are reasons that I am showing you to do it this way. This is more of a best practice, or I don't want to call it a best practice, but let's call it a sound practice. By doing it this way and laying out the PLC first, even before you add manufacturers, what you will find is that things will work more smoothly for you when you are then developing your schematics, when you are developing your inputs and outputs. All of it is going to then be coherent because you are not trying to force things to be in positions that are predefined. So let's go ahead now and let's look at this Add Manufacturer's Part to the layout. Here we are looking at adding manufacturer's parts. So we need to first figure out, are those manufacturer's parts already in your library? If not, do you need to create those parts? Not only creating them, but is all the information possibly already in that part that you want to be in a report? And lastly, what we will end up doing is then associating your parts to a position in that PLC layout. So when we do something like that, again, now we're going to look at the library, go to our manufacturer's part and grab possibly the fact of a PLC that we have. Well, let's look at that rack first. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight a rack that already exists in my software, and then I am going to add a manufacturer's part. Why would I do this? Well, it is then capturing all of the information from that previous part that you highlighted. So when you go to make a custom part, that custom part now already has the information or the functioning that you might need to make work. Here we're talking about that 7-slot rack. By adding it and just changing the part number and adding a manufacturer, it has created that. So let's go ahead now and let's look at that rack and go ahead and replace this module. Of course, at any point in time, you can go to the properties and swap out the manufacturer. It's as simple as that. By doing so, though, I have the previous information. Even if I need to swap a different size rack, I can do so. But truly, if you are just swapping out a 1-to-1 ratio here, these types of things then become very easy and very fluid because you are not needing to worry a lot. We're going to look at the properties here of that first PLC. Again, I only put in a mark, so now I can go ahead and just grab a manufacturer that I am placing in this module, in this specific position. Let's look at the cards now. The cards are here. They already have the positions of 1 through 7. I am still going to add a module when I am placing a card into a rack. We are only going to add one at a time. Now, the one thing to keep in mind, notice that there is a card position already being selected when I am selecting the specific position in the rack. Never are you going to try and force a card position to another spot. You want to leave it where it was. So here I'm just going to go ahead and grab a module or another module, this time another 16 input, and place this. And I want to show you here that what I did is I created it and called it card. Now my numbering I have set up for card, but each number, even though it says 4, I have it set up for an alpha character afterwards, which is why mine shows card C now. Notice here I'm going to place another device, but this device is going to be a 32-point card, which actually takes up 2 slots. Now, if you look, what is happening is that 2 slots is literally giving you the double quotations to fill that secondary slot. It's still part of that same module. So to do that, what you are looking at is where it says slot on a specific part. You are just simply adding a number 2, or you can even add that into the manufacturer so that it will then, just like a rack had 7 slots, a module can have more than 1 slot taking up for a rack, and so you might add that 2 in that position for that module. So here we have that 7. Let's look at this first module here. There is a module in this place. It was just a fictitious module. I can now remove it and add a different part, because all I am doing is I am leaving it as mod, and then I am grabbing a new manufacturer, and it can be any PLC part. I like to keep it as modules. We'll go ahead and just grab the 16 input, even though it's a card that would normally go in a rack. These types of things are very easy once you've laid out a rack beforehand. So notice this one says slot and 2 position, or 2 slot. That is where it is taking up 2 positions if it were in a rack. All right, so we'll just finish up here grabbing this last device. Of course, I've created a whole bunch of GoEngineer parts that I am truly working with here. There's that 32. All right, so now that I have this is very straightforward. I haven't even started with my schematics yet. I'm just simply laying out what I am going to handle for being able to then draw. Because, of course, when you are then drawing, it is a matter of now figuring out what it is that you are wanting to see when you are laying out these pieces. So let's go ahead then. And we've got that. Let's go ahead now and look at this draw schematic. So we're going to look at each of these in turn. Full auto. So we'll draw schematics. We'll determine what type of schematic symbol we want it to look like. We'll be figuring out whether we need a schematic fast, because there's one option or another that will, one is extremely fast, and the others are not as fast because it takes a little bit more time because you're doing it yourself rather than letting the software create that symbol. If you have no idea what you would like the schematic symbols to look like or represent, never know. Let's look at this first option. The first option, again, I call it fully automatic, but it is called Generate Drawings. This option is only found in the PLC Manager. The software is going to create schematic sheets for you. You don't have to go to the book and right-click and say New Schematic and then find a symbol in the library. You don't have to do that. The PLC configuration is going to create a schematic symbol on each of the sheets for you. However, there are two limitations. One is that there is only going to be one symbol per page. And then secondly, that symbol cannot be modified in its current form for any additional graphic details. So what you see is what you get as far as the symbol, but again, it is something that I find there are a lot of people that do use it in a bind. Let's look at what this looks like, and it's actually extremely fast. So we'll go ahead and close out our in fact, we don't want to close out our PLC Manager here because we want to actually use our PLC Manager. We are going to use this Generate Drawings in our PLC Manager. Well, let's look at that configuration. So it is under the Configuration tab under PLCs. You will find the configurations that are for the application. You never make a change to an original. So you always make a duplicate. And when you make a duplicate, you should always change the name to something that you recognize. Because I find most people will make that duplicate and forget to change the name or forget to change the description. And then they can't remember, you start getting all kinds of crazy numbers. So anytime you see a graphic space, remember that you can zoom and pan. And when I highlight a specific row here on my table, I can then see it highlight in this list. These are what the symbols are going to look like with the attributes that are going to be both in the top and the bottom. If you don't like these attributes, you might want to make your own attribute symbol to then apply it to this template. And of course, here is where the symbols are going to be placed. One either on the right or one on the, well, actually I should say one on the left or one on the right. It is not going to place both of them. It is simply going to be one or the other. The connection points, notice here the only type of symbol that I am using has just a P tag, which is just the mark. However, when I look at the circuitry, the circuits that are being used in your PLC are then in this list. Each one of these types of circuits has an attribute or symbol that is being applied to either the right or the left symbol. And notice that there is a direction under that circuit type for which symbol is going to be used for that side. The PLC drawing is just going to be the description name when it creates that drawing in your project. When you're done, you simply say Apply. This is actually utilized in the project template under this first general tab down where it says PLC Drawing. So I can simply hit this and change it. This is a default, but when you are using Insert PLC, it is then going to utilize that template with whatever standard schematic title block you are using. To fire this off, you simply go to your electrical project, the PLC Manager, and you are going to just highlight the project name. If you highlight the project name, it is going to generate drawings for every PLC and card and module in that PLC Manager. You simply select which book or folder you want those drawings to be in. I don't have one, so I simply said OK, and then I just simply let it generate. Anything that has circuitry is then going to get a schematic sheet. So at this point, we're just waiting for those to finish up. You see, we are killing lots of trees at the moment. But there is also one module that did not get drawn. Why? It's a rack. It has no circuitry. Now, this first drawing here, this is what your symbols are going to look like. They are simply rectangles with some added attributes, but it does give you those marks. It also gives you some additional numbering. Now, I'm not real worried about the numbering or the marks on the PLC. That's going to be handled in the Inputs and Outputs webinar. I am more concerned with how this PLC looks. So you'll see that I've got the red dots for where the wires are going to be placed. And then at the same time, I've got these attributes that are being shown, and I've also showing the cross-reference. That cross-reference is just relating to the different symbols that are being broken up based off of each model to then say where the other piece of that module is located. Let's look at the second one. Again, that was very rigid, but yet it was very fast. The second option is called semi-automatic, as far as my term. It's called Insert PLC in your software. There are multiple areas of where you can find that specific function. You are going to create the schematic sheets. The PLC configuration will then create schematic symbols for you. However, you get to determine how much of that symbol will be placed on a page. You also get to determine not only how much, but how many or where those symbols are being placed on the page. However, the limitation is, of course, you are using the configurator, so that symbol cannot be modified for this graphics detail. So again, we're still going to have that. Now, I want to point out a couple things here. This component, notice that these components have infinity symbols underneath them, which means because I use the PLC Manager, when I go to delete these sheets, I am not deleting the devices. And that's one of the biggest things that people have not realized is that by not using the PLC Manager, you are not keeping those manufacturer's parts, so things get deleted. So here I'm just going to go ahead and create some schematic sheets. I did delete the old ones because I didn't want to use those, so now I'm going to use this Insert PLC. You are going to select each module in turn, so we'll start with this PLC, and now we're going to use this configuration that's over here on the left. I can select how many pins are going to be placed, and my symbol then gets adjusted as far as size. I can click on the little red dots here to actually change it from a card that's on the right to the card that's on the left, so it's an input module. And you know what? I'm going to stop right here because I'm going to go ahead and add a second module, but I want to go ahead and add another title block. So I'm going to replace my title block with a title block that has 2 columns. Now I'm going to go ahead and add a second card. I'm going to go ahead and say Insert PLC, select the existing, go ahead back to that PLC that I've already got. You can see now that half of it is green because I've already placed it. I'm going to go ahead and place the secondary symbol now. And of course the symbol realizes, or the configuration, that I've got the 3 little inputs, or the USB, and the 2 ports that are still left. And so I'm going to go ahead and play around with this, and you know what? That should probably be on top. So I'm going to go ahead now and I can just pull and move these symbols around to place them where I feel they should be. And there, that kind of looks, a little bit better. I kind of like how that's laying out with the USB and the Ethernet ports on the top. And then we go into the inputs followed by the outputs for this module. And you just continue to do that with each schematic sheet. It's not, or each module and each card. And you can place as much as or as little as you want to each page. Now, the last option is the option you are probably most used to. But the difference is, of course, because you've placed it in the PLC Manager, it is already fully created for you and has that infinity symbol. So when you go to delete something, you are not going to lose any bit of this. Now, in manual here, where we are dealing with this, you are dealing with just associating schematic symbols. You are going to create the schematic sheet. You then create and select the symbols to be utilized. You then associate the PLC, the card, the module to that specific schematic symbol. Pretty straightforward. So when you're doing this, what you are truly doing, and we're going to do this through a contextual menu here, where I already have these devices, so I can now simply highlight, and instead of saying right-click, and instead of saying Insert PLC, I'm going to select a symbol in my library. When I place it, it is now already associated. This is called a contextual menu. Well, you can just as easily do it the opposite way. You might be more used to the fact of not even knowing which device it's going to be, but placing that specific symbol. So, of course, you go up to Insert Symbol, and you place it, and now you select from the right side which module it is supposed to represent. It is then now available and associated. However, the PLC Manager is where you started. That being the case, you are now keeping everything locked in position for that numbering and that I/O that we will be looking at in our next webinar. So, here we have now determined how we will be drawing the schematics. With that, I thank you so much for joining us for the PLC Basics. Join us again. We will be also presenting in our next series how to deep dive into those inputs and outputs. How do we number everything? How do we get those, maybe your PLC logic inputs and outputs associated to these inputs and outputs of the PLC, and then associate them to these specific modules. We'll just be building right upon what we have already designed here. I thank you so much for attending. And again, if you need any further information, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are more than welcome to have you reach out, and we will try and assist or show you how to do specific things if you are needing. Thanks for your time.